I am going to separate this part of the talk and put it on another tape for reasons that will become clear later on. In our previous talks together, we've seen how the mystics of all ages have spoken out from a self-realized solipsism. We have seen that modern science has begun to discover a similar solipsism. That discovery began with the quantum process and the laws of probability, verified by the findings of particle physicists as they sat there at their bevrons and linear accelerators, and is now being confirmed yet again by the astronomers as they see Einstein's predictions coming true for them, watching light bent into black holes around the supermasses of collapsars or neutron stars, so dense that a teaspoon of such a mass weighs literally tens of billions of tons. I have attempted to explain in the preceding tape that there's a primary difference between the solipsism of the physicist and the mystic. But that difference is apparently not yet clearly understood, and it is virtually unexamined by the theoretical mathematicians and the particle physicists who most need to do it. Now, the difference, briefly, is this. For our present-day scientists, the predicate upon which they stand now with their new quantum is that observed matter and the observing are essentially the same process, the same thing. At least these two are inextricably linked because they are clearly able to see, that is, the physicists are, that any alteration to the observing also alters the observed. All right? But the solipsism of the mystic begins, a quantum leap beyond this. Further along, the mystic, now listen, the mystic links observer to the observing and observed, and sees that they are one. Now, I've had enough conversations with enough scientists and philosophers and experimental mathematicians to know that some of them say that they are already doing just this, and that this subtle distinction that I make here between the physicist's position at the moment and the mystic's position of the moment constitutes a subtle semantic game. But please listen, all you scientists, while you may be making this trilogistic linkage, repeating as the mystic often has that the seer, the seeing, and the seen are one, it appears that most of you do not yet seem aware that the observer in this trilogy, who is linked with the observing and the observed, is still what is considered to be the human mind, a personal mind, to whom this information is being reported. Now, listen softly. The mystic, on the other hand, concludes that the mind, which is the instrument of all this process, is not the individual scientist's mind or the individual mystic's mind, but is the ineffable mind, Godhead mind, if that isn't too far out. They further, the mystic perceives that the living image appearing as this physical body, appearing as the individual scientist or mystic, is process happening. That is awareness going on. That this is the tangible appearing of awareness in operation. And that this process is Godhead awareness and not the individually owned awareness of a particular scientist who is pursuing some field of activity. Now granted, that seems like a very fine distinction, and yet the distinction is 180 degrees apart. There is all the difference between those two views as there is difference between the old ideas of what energy is and Einstein's E equals mc squared. I might add that philosophers have recently given this concept that I have just discussed as the mystic's concept the rather imposing name of Deific Solipsism, whereas the former, that which appears as the premise presently used by you scientists, could be called humanistic solipsism. Now, a member of the British Philosophic Society tells me that a guide to awareness and tranquility, after a very careful examination of it by that society, does in their minds represent the first complete statement of Deific Solipsism ever made, to their knowledge. And it is also, to their knowledge, only the second complete philosophic system presented in this century, the other apparently being Sartre's work, which is essentially materialistic, as I understand it. Sartre's existentialism, which I don't know much about, apparently has no room for black holes. That is, it has no room for ineffability or Godhead, or to admit that anything lies beyond the limits of the human mind's capability to understand. But now comes the mathematician's discovery of event horizons, comes his discovery of singularities, naked singularities even, of stationary black holes and rotating black holes, to make the rather graphic point that there is indeed, as now the physicist can see with his linear accelerator and the astronomer can see with his battery of equipment, that there is indeed a limit to our present concept of understanding. That is, where our reason and logic appear to break down, wherein the limits beyond which human sensibilities, as they are presently interpreted, cannot pass. The wise men concerned with the microcosm found their event horizon was more than theory, was more than mathematical theory. They found the black hole, the antimatter, that is the antithesis of matter. And now the astrophysicists, examining the macrocosm, have found a great macro event horizon, black holes, cosmic barriers, where everything would appear to virtually come to an end, where time reverses and moves in the other way, toward creation rather than disintegration, where time stops, where space ends, or where space becomes superspace, filled with an infinity of universes, surrounding an impenetrable mass of nothingness, into which somethingness is thrown into a compression and leaving absolute nothingness, and yet which appears tangibly, reasonably, and logically from this side of the event horizon like the graveyard of stars, like collapsars calling for the end of the universe. Well, how sanguine it must seem to the scientific and philosophic thinkers, so proud of their prowess, to discover that for the information of 3,000 years of study and accumulation of facts, all about a material tangibility, has only brought them, ultimately, to a void of nothingness. By starting with a flat earth error, starting with the premise that there is a grand me to discover truth, working bottom upward, arms outstretched, looking for truth through the distorting lens of an ego, an intermediary. Well, they are, as Paul said of the Romans, become vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the uncorruptible, ineffable one, and turned it into an image like a corruptible man and creeping thing. Back in 1905, someone quite unschooled in cosmology announced to the world a new equation using a new language about energy and light. Here it is, something like 74 years later. We're still trying to prove it. And technology is trying to use the proofs. Now, in 1905, had computer technology been available, it wouldn't have taken this long. And in 1917, when the general theory of relativity was announced, it wouldn't have taken an additional 35 or 40 years before a bomb exploded over the sands of Alamogordo. Well, a computer technology presently exists that can take the equations, the very simple equation in words that is present at the beginning of this tape, and those who know how to program computers, those who are able to see the very slight change in the mathematical equation between observer, observing, observed, and beginning top down with this process, will find, as I have found, that this very slight shift can be the beginning of answers to every question at the moment that appears enigmatic. And that includes the grand black holes that supposedly cannot be understood. I think what I am trying to say here, as best words will allow me, is what was revealed to me and has been lived and proven for a period of 25 years, and has proven so efficacious in this experience, being me, and those who have listened and heard it as well, is presently the so close to the particle physicists' comprehension, the astronomers' comprehension, and the experimental mathematicians' comprehension, that they are their famous jiffy away from it. And I would ask that they consider and examine and see for themselves if this minute alteration in thinking, which in essence heralds a new way to think, it heralds a new language, it heralds all things new, and they can, with the existing, or you can, with all of the existing technology that's available now, put this to computerized proof and see if some of the enigma will not become immediately clear. Friends, I realize that this is self-to-self discourse. I am here now facing my holistic selfhood, appearing as all tangible life, yet for all the world sounding like a single voice crying in the wilderness. But I know that this can be understood by that small group who faced the same problems I faced in the past, and who stand just their famous jiffy away by making the most minute adjustments in some of their computer programming. I know that there is a genuine relationship between my so-called past experience of old, getting myself into a position where I had no choice other than to let go the old think, and the present position that the world faces, wherein, unless the voices are crying in the wilderness are listened to and given their opportunity, there will seem to be a cosmic event so binding in its consequences that the world will be forced to adopt the new think, the seminal idea. Yet I can foresee that action by that fortuitous group of scientists who are thinking as futurists, that the toilsome and deadly aspect of those events can be avoided without the need of a tangible death to force us past the event horizon of joyful living. I'm convinced that the astrophysicist, the particle physicist, the theoretical mathematician, those engaged in cosmological studies, origins, black holes, neutrino behavior, working with accelerators, among them will be those who will hear something in this message that will permit a dramatic discovery to take place here in the arena of tangibility, where it seems that life is so important to everyone. If this sounds egocentric or egomaniacal or insane, I apologize, because what follows may be exactly that to the trained ear that expects reasoned, rational, logical, and supported thoughts. I realize that the people I'm talking to are busy people, each with enough to read and to listen to keep abreast of their own specialty, not likely to pay very much attention to someone unschooled, unlettered, basically unknowledgeable in their field. Well, you'd much rather be reading a paper by some funded scientist who has just finished a multi-million-dollar project. This much is certain. As present-day science's upreach attains ever loftier positions of supposed knowledge, and as technology finds ways to put it to work for mankind and their governments, we can be absolutely certain that ignorance is growing 100-fold faster. You see, according to intellectualism, according to the human academe, what one does not know constitutes the degree of his ignorance. The discoveries made every day merely compound the abysmal stupidity of an intellect void of intellectual fact. So, as this grand explosion of knowledge increases in its proliferating speed in one direction, so does one's ignorance grow in the other direction. You see, try as one may to keep up with one subject, the very effort only makes certain the speed is plummet into ignorance in all the other directions. So our marvelous discoveries in every area, from radio astronomy to neutron slicing and genetic engineering, are merely making it all the more impossible for anyone to ever get smart. The explosion of knowledge has created a situation for the universities akin, very much akin, to the intellectual black hole, such as the astrophysicists and particle scientists have discovered for themselves. Whatever effort one puts forth nowadays to be knowledgeable only accelerates his fall into the void of ignorance, because while he was learning this and that field, that was being discovered in this that he doesn't know. So lo, his knowledge has moved toward an insoluble complexity which appears to doom the academe eventually, as being unable ever to instruct anyone across the board, and if not in this century, the next. Just as the black holes of this tangible universe appear to augur its physical end, if not in this age, then in the next. But fortunately, this construction of complexity produced by science and its technology are not the products of round earth, but are the products of old flat think, based on a minute error, a minute premise of sand that needs only the slightest change. The very same computers that are presently so marvelously spinning out one dramatic discovery after another, leading to complexity, can, with the slightest adjustment, be capable of spinning out wonders quite beyond anything yet dreamed by the futurists among us. Like I say, Einstein made that remarkably simple declaration in 1905 that has dramatically altered the course of science's thinking. A statement so simple but 75 years later, we've just found our first tangible proofs of his predicted gravity waves via the computer technology. Technology so remarkably accurate that it is able to measure the first jiffy of Big Bang when tangibility was born. Do you know what a jiffy is to an astronomer? Do you know? A jiffy, if you'll believe this, a jiffy is 100,000 billion billionths of a second. And in actuality, we are even closer than that to a tangible realization of perfection here at hand, right now, already, tangibly so. Now hear this. The metaphysician is forever trying to prove his knowing, his knowledge of the absolute. Well, exactly the same. The scientist is forever trying to prove his theories, to explain what is before his eyes. In both instances, the motion is from tangibility toward intangibility, from the known toward the unknown. But what I have discovered for myself is this, and it is this discovery that will allow this minute alteration in thinking to take place. When I was forced to accept the totality of the absolute, the totality of the ineffable, which of course is the simultaneous understanding and letting go of its equal and opposite, the somethingness of me mind, of ego mind, of another mind beside the absolute. Well, when this happened for me, the motion was turned around. I was no longer forced to prove anything. There was no onus on me to prove my metaphysical know-how or my scientific observations. I didn't have to prove anything. Rather, the ineffable, the absolute, rushed directly through the event horizon of this awareness being identity to prove itself. It came forth from holistic mind, holistic awareness, and burst through into tangible awareness, where I could make sense of it. Granted, when the light came in this direction, I didn't always understand the revelation at the moment. But I quickly learned to live it as the fact, even when it seemed absurd or nearly impossible to the world or to the old think of me. I might make this illustration. The old think approach is as one standing, suffering, reaching out in one or two directions, struggling to get to the ineffable. Whether it's a metaphysician or a mystic or a scientist. But the fact is, the all-surrounding, the totality of the ineffable reaches toward the new identity from an infinite number of directions, all pointing toward the center I am. But so long as the ego singularity struggles outward for proof, the inward rushing proof is prevented from jumping through the event horizon between holistic awareness and conscious awareness. That is, one simply doesn't become aware of the much wisdom already present subconsciously. And he isn't aware at all of the ego sense that prevents it. All right, so much for what must sound like an almost hysterical pleading to my scientific sense of self to look behind them and see the already. Perhaps it would be interesting for those scholars of you to find that the Valentinians in the very first century spoke of a cosmology that is so remarkably similar as to be astounding. They too spoke of light or of matter as being arrested light or slowed light, light that had been spewed forth from an orifice in heaven from which all tangibility springs. And that's a subject that we might talk of later. Harper's Magazine published this statement: "We are looking for the seminal idea, the objective judgment on the trend of things, the air-clearing outburst of indignation which will suddenly throw everything about us into a new perspective, and which is likely as not to come from some individual who sits all by himself, unorganized, unrecognized, unorthodox, and unterrified." Well, Woodsong friends, we have found the seminal idea. It's now only a matter of living it and allowing its proof to present itself as our experience.